Welcome to this next session. Conserving South Africa's birds is a monumental task. We at BirdLife South Africa are only able to achieve what we do through effective conservation partnerships with government and other NGOs. We value our excellent working relationship with our many partners across our projects. In this session, we will be hearing from 3 of these partners. We will start off with Dr. Lucy Kemp, Project Manager at the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project. This is an extra special feature as the ground hornbill is our bird of the year for 2020. Do visit their exhibition booth to view all the materials that have been produced, which include lesson plans and kids activities. Next, we invite Dr. Lara Jordan to speak on the Endangered Wildlife Trust, or EWT, and their work as part of the African Crane Conservation Program. And lastly, we travel down to Cape Town to join Dr. David G. Roberts, the resident veterinarian at SANCCOB, which stands for the Southern African Foundation for the Conservation of Coastal Birds, to take a tour of their facilities, which includes a fully kitted seabird hospital and some rather cute patients in a pool. Over to Lucy.
Hi, welcome. My name is Lucy Kemp. Thank you for dropping by to listen to how we go about the conservation of the Southern Ground Hornbill, the BirdLife Bird of the Year for 2020. It's been an incredibly strong, incredibly beautiful collaboration with BirdLife in getting the plight of the species out there to South Africa, and we've had an enormous response and interest, and it's just been absolutely breathtaking. We wish they could be Bird of the Year every year. I'm the project manager for the Mabula Ground Hornbill project. We are also the BirdLife Species Guardian, and I'm the chair of the Southern Ground Hornbill Working Group, which we also call the Thunderbird Task Team. And I'm co-chair of the IUCN Species Survival Commission Hornbill Specialist Group. And what I'll be sharing today is just a snippet of what we do. The ground hornbill story is a big story, and it's intricate, but I'd like to share some of our highlights and also just share what really cool birds these are. What I am presenting, though, is on behalf of a huge community of collaborators. They're a tricky species, they're very complex in any number of ways, and so it has taken the guys in the in-situ community on the ground in our parks, whether they're private reserves, provincial, national, right through to the captive breeding guys in the ex-situ community. And then obviously the more we learn about this bird, the more we learn, there's still more to learn. And we need to answer these questions well to ensure that the conservation action that we're taking on the ground is evidence-based. Because they're so long-lived, the decisions we take today, we will only probably see the fruit of in 10 to 20 years. So we need to be really clear about what we're doing and make sure that we're making very smart decisions on behalf of the species. There are 2 ground hornbill species on the African continent. On the left is the Southern Ground Hornbill, which is the one that keeps us up awake at night, worrying about their future. And the bird on the right with that brilliant blue is the Northern or Abyssinian Ground Hornbill that occurs north of the equator. Both of these are top order predators, which makes them ecologically important, but they're also culturally important, really deeply important in the hearts and minds of many people across our continent. They're also an excellent umbrella or flagship species. Anything we can do to mitigate the threats for even one ground hornbill territory, which is about 100 square kilometers in the South African context, means we're cleaning up the landscape for a bunch of other threatened species, secretary birds, vultures, wild dogs, and any number of other threatened species. So really what we can get right for ground hornbills is also of benefit to a number of other species. Unfortunately, although the ground hornbill is listed as vulnerable throughout its full range, in South Africa and Namibia, and probably Botswana and Zimbabwe, the species is listed as endangered by the IUCN Red List criteria. And worse than that, the population is still in decline. So we're on that very dodgy slope down towards critically endangered. And the further down that slope we go, the harder it is to try and pull the species back from the brink. So at the moment, our entire mandate is to slow the decline and with time be able to reverse the decline so we can rebuild ground hornbill populations to something that will be sustainable in a changing climate and a changing world, and ensure that somewhere between all of our land uses, we're able to keep a space for these birds. Speaking of space, if you look at this image, that's the normal for ground hornbills in Africa. We do often in our memories have them as big striding beasts across the Kruger savannas, But actually for most of their range, this is their normal, in amongst the cattle, in amongst homesteads, really sharing the landscape with the people around them. But unfortunately, the problem for the species is us. The biggest reasons for their decline are all anthropogenic in nature. And it's not just us against them. Their life history traits are all those that would make them more extinction prone. They have a very complicated life history strategy. And yeah, unfortunately, because of that, they're just really struggling to maintain their populations in the face of everything that we throw at them. The biggest threat that we throw at them by far is that of poisoning. Throughout South Africa, there's still many farmers who still use poison bait to control pest species or feral dogs. And ground hornbills will scavenge. They're very smart, they're opportunistic. And so if they come across a poison bait item, they will absolutely try and eat it. And the problem as they forage together is that you don't just lose a single individual, but you lose an entire breeding unit. So we're starting to see these groups across the landscape becoming extinguished like candles. The other big threat is lead toxicosis. Even the tiniest fragment of a spent lead ammunition piece is enough to kill a ground hornbill. And obviously there's many reasons why there would be lead in the landscape. People shoot animals for a number of reasons. But the problem is if any of that lead is left in the landscape, in a piece of meat, a ground hornbill is, or other species are likely to ingest that, and lead is poisonous. They do become electrocuted on transformer boxes. They love to roost on big open structures, and unfortunately, as Eskom really tries hard to get electricity to more and more South Africans, this risk is thus spreading. And so we're working closely with Eskom now, particularly in the Lowveld area, to try and mitigate this threat. They're also fall foul of persecution. Ground hornbills are highly territorial. They want to protect that territory against intruders. They need to protect their precious nest. And their precious female, you know, she's the queen bee of the group and needs to be protected at all costs. And unfortunately what happens is when they see their reflection, that is one of the intruders, whether it be on a window or even your shiny car. And that leads to human-wildlife conflict. And unfortunately, the end result of that is sometimes mortal persecution. And so that's something that we're working hard on. And then the birds do turn up in trade. They're used locally for traditional-based medicine, but as far as we understand, this is only used opportunistically, whereas further north in the range, there's a much bigger trade for the aviculture trade. Ground hornbills also lose nests. They need those big trees, and we're losing those throughout our landscapes. But thankfully, as you saw on that opening slide with the youngster in the artificial nest, this is something we can provide for them. And those nests, we're doing our absolute best to make sure that they're future-proof. We're finding with climate change, as we get these longer hot spells in the summer months, it seems to be leading to low productivity. And so what we need is to make sure that these nests are going to do them good, even in a warming climate. So compound all of that with their monstrous time and spatial requirements. They can live until they're 70, they're over a meter tall, and even the biggest group you see of 9 or even 10 birds will only ever fledge 1 chick per group per year at the most. They reach sexual maturity really late, so anything from 8 to 10 in captivity, but that's just when we put boy and girl together and they get on with it. In the wild, they first have to attain that very important social standing within the group before they can become one of the alpha pair. As I mentioned, the very large spatial requirements in the South African context, anything from 80 to 100 square kilometers, and the further and more arid you go up into the Limpopo River Valley, at the moment that population is sitting at about 1 group for every 200 square kilometers. These birds also have an extensive learning phase. The youngsters are really quite dwarf until they're 3 to 5 years old. They need the whole group to teach them a range of things, how to kill venomous snakes, how to keep an eye out for predators. But if we can get them past those dodgy 5 years until they're really bush savvy, then if we can remove the natural threats, then it's very likely that they will live until they're 70. The general group structure is the alpha pair with mostly male helpers, and female chicks are usually booted from the group under the age of 1, so they're really vulnerable, and this leads to a big sex skew in the population. And in each of those groups, whether it's 2 or 12, there's only 1 breeding female. So how on earth are we going to turn this around? We as the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project work off these 6 key pillars. So monitoring is a key aspect, research, restoring the population in areas where they become locally extinct, all the time trying to improve how we operate, mitigate for as many of the known threats as possible, and then intertwined through each of those is a very strong and widespread education and awareness campaign. We do try very hard to ensure that everything we do is science-based, also community-driven, because without the community that shares the land with these people involved, wherever it is and regardless of the land use, we're unlikely to be successful. And also, given the nature of the species and the nature of the problem, we need to be as multidisciplinary as possible. So in terms of monitoring, this is what we have at the moment. The grey squares are the historic range from, as best we know, from all the published records that we could find. And then unfortunately, the little green squares, which are at a pentad scale, are what is left. So that data is from 2009 to 2019. And this is our base map that we're using to kick off the 4-year monitoring plan that we launched this year. If you look at the little squares on the bottom left-hand corner, those are hypothetical pentads. And a pentad is a proxy because it's about the same size as one group territory. So what we're trying to do is absolutely safeguard every one of those green pentads. So ensure that the group that remains on that pentad remains there, and slowly build those groups by creating environments where it's possible for them to recolonize, and then using the reintroductions to patch some of the really big gaps. Obviously, they're very difficult to census. So if those grid squares go green, from green to yellow, that means a group hasn't been seen for 2 years in a row. But we don't discredit that group or turn it red until they haven't been seen for 4 years. They are really hard to census. To come across a group within 100 square kilometer on the day that you visit is really unlikely. And so we've worked out the system that's easy to use, color-coded, and relies heavily on citizen science. And that's the way we're getting a lot of the data at the moment, is through this network of champions that has actually grown since I made this. We're up to 19 champions now. And each of these champions or champion couple pairs has created a WhatsApp group for their local area, and they get as many interested neighbors and community members on board. And they're reporting every time they see ground hornbills, obviously within their own home range, but also if they travel. And through the system, just this year, since the beginning of the year, we've been able to add 75 green pentads to the map. And each of these is verified. We often have photos as well of the groups. And this means that there may be more ground hornbills than we know of out there. But that also means, though, we have to maintain each of the current greens. We cannot lose those, even if we're gaining others elsewhere. So we're very interested to see where this goes. And if you see your area underrepresented on this map and you feel you'd like to set up a champion network, please get in touch with us and we'll help you set that up. In terms of mitigation, obviously trying to provide nests is low-hanging fruit, and we can do that with what we call our super nests that are climate-proofed as well. And then in terms of the window breaking, this is perforated vinyl, also known as contravision, that we've been able to put up in a number of schools. And since that has gone up, the problem with the ground hornbills has gone away, and the communities are much more enamored with their resident groups. As you can see on the bottom left, the birds are capable of breaking up to 300 window panes in a morning, and often these schools do not have the resources to replace these. And so these kids spend a lot of cold winters in class with howling gale winds and have the ground hornbills to thank for that. And you know, we don't want them to grow up thinking of ground hornbills as something that made their childhoods miserable. The other risk, obviously, also is for the ground hornbills. If you look at the second picture with the blood droplets, the ground hornbills are also at risk of injuring themselves when they smash the glass. So anything we can do to mitigate that is great. And graffiti branding has been incredible in helping supply us with the contravision where we need it most. The common thread throughout all of this is our education program. This is Timber, our mascot. And we're finding that if we can just get people to understand the life history of the species, they really can relate to it quite easily, because ground hornbills are a lot like us in many respects. And we find this engenders an empathy, a love, and with that comes the desire to protect. So we keep this going from school owners up to traditional authority councils in as many areas as we can possibly get to.
In a small village, there lived a clever girl called Knowledge. One night, as her grandfather said good night, she asked him why the rains had not come. The grandfather said that many years ago, there were these giant birds called the brown hornbill, also known as thunder or rainbirds, that had a magnificent call that would often be followed by good rain, but he hadn't seen one in many years. Maybe that was why there was no rain.
We're trying to use as many innovative ways of reconnecting people with their cultural love for the species. They're known as the rain or the thunderbird throughout the range, and really weaving that into the story of why they're important for all of us to keep them around. And so this little animation that was just a snippet will be coming out in all the languages that we need to get across the South African range. And then to go with that, we've, together with the South African Conservation Trust, have come up with this really cool little comic book, and we really would love to get one of these into the hands of each child that shares the land with ground hornbills. It tells the story of Temba and his dog walking through the landscape. They meet a ground hornbill, and together they explore the landscape, understand all of the threats to the birds, and find ways together of coming up with solutions within that bird's territory. And that's how it needs to be. We need custodianship. The people who share the land with one group, they are going to have to be the people who will protect that group. The other tool available to us is reintroductions, taking the second hatched chicks that are redundant, that naturally always die in the nest, and rear those into being big, strong, able, viable adult ground hornbills. This has been a really long journey to get to where we are today, and it's even taken us having to build a custom purpose conservation rearing centre. This is in partnership with the Mpumalanga Tourism and Parks Agency at Loskop Dam Nature Reserve. And we needed to build this to make sure that we're ticking each of the boxes, each of the developmental stages of these birds, and that they really only grow up seeing, knowing, hearing ground hornbills, and that they in no way associate anything really with humans. So I'll take you through a little walkthrough through the centre. That's the staff offices, our incubation room on the left. The restaurant is where we rear the food stocks for the hornbills. And it took us 3 years of fundraising to be able to present this. This is our BAOBAB. This we hope to be the cradle of the future generation of South Africans. Each of these little nest pockets where Kruger is standing is where the chicks will come into. They now have beautiful facades and actually look like nests from the outside with artificial brooders on the inside, and they will be reared within that second story of the building, and they will fledge into those foster groups in each of those aviaries that radiate out from the nests. And this is the best way we can build physiologically and behaviorally strong birds that are strong, wild, and really built for success. So given all the threats thrown at the species, there are days when we do feel down. However, there's a lot to be said for hope for the species. We have developed conservation tools that work. We have strong collaborations that are constantly striving to fix many of the wrongs that the species faces. Because we work with this multidisciplinary team, we're able to get many more brains on board, trying to find solutions. Evidence-based. The birds themselves are iconic. You probably hear today because you really love the species. It has some memories of some happy time in the bushveld, listening to them calling in the early dawn. The flagship species is an important aspect, and also they themselves are opportunistic and generalist in their feeding habits, and this makes them flexible within their habitat requirements as long as they've got big trees to roost in, a nest, and large open areas or short grass where they can forage, where it's safe from all of the threats that we mentioned. They will be fine. And coupled with the immense cultural protection that they already enjoy, we do feel that all of us together as a community can turn the tide for the species. So we'd really like to thank you for your time, for dropping in today. Huge thank you to the BirdLife team and also to the Hans Hoheisen Charitable Trust for all of their support of the Bird of the Year products and promotions and the Bird Fair and everything that they've done to get the word out about ground hornbills. Please, for more details, visit our booth. We chat about all of these things in more detail, and anytime you're welcome to have a look at our website. We also have a number of really cool prizes going, so yeah, please drop in and click on the call to action button, and we'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Laura Jordan. I work for the African Crane Conservation Programme, and I'm the Drakensberg coordinator. So I work for two organisations, a partnership between the International Crane Foundation and the Endangered Wildlife Trust. And today I'm just going to talk a little bit about craniacs in South Africa, why we love the cranes, as I'm sure most of you do. But then I'm also just going to explain a little bit about some of the work that we do. So let's get, why are we all craniacs? I mean, look at the beauty, the grace, the flight, the dancing. There are so many reasons that we love cranes, and you can see in some countries like Uganda, they're the national bird. In South Africa, of course, our national bird is the blue crane, but they have always inspired artists, writers, and when we, a couple of our favorite quotes are, when we hear cranes, we hear no mere bird, we hear the orchestra of evolution by Aldo Leopold. I mean, what a beautiful saying, and just, you know, to soak the words in, that when we hear things like this. And Sir David Attenborough, cranes are magnificent dancers, international travellers, and great ambassadors for conservation worldwide. What birds could be more deserving for our help and protection? And obviously, I'm sure I'm speaking to the converted that this is true. You can see some birds, they're so elegant when they're fighting, or when they're pairing, or when they're dancing to secure their bonds. So they truly are magnificent species and taxon of birds. So this is the 15 species around the world. So I'm based in South Africa, so I'm going to talk about the blue crane, the wattle crane, and the crown crane, the grey crown crane. Cranes are a very ancient form of bird, and scientists have discovered fossils of crane bones that are over 25 million years old, which I always think is truly amazing. So here's the 15 crane species, and here's the threatened status as in the IUCN Red List. You can see here blue cranes are vulnerable, wattle cranes are also vulnerable globally, and grey crown cranes are endangered globally. However, the wattle crane in South Africa is critically endangered. The aerial survey numbers are looking good this year, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the blue crane, although it's classified as vulnerable, there is definitely significant threats going on there, which we won't unfortunately have time to get into the details of today, but it really, although it's only classified as vulnerable, there's some much greater things going on with that species. Okay, so generally, why are the birds threatened? Now, I'm just generalizing across 3 species, but generally it's habitat loss, but the crown crane and the wattle cranes are indeed wetland species for breeding, roosting, and the blue crane lives more in agricultural landscapes, and of course this relates to the food that they eat. And then in those agricultural landscapes, we have different uses, uses of the lands, different fence line structures, which alters foraging grounds. We have infrastructure such as power lines, which can interrupt a crane's plans, predation, changing environmental threats such as climate change, and we all know we're still trying to understand what those threats might actually be. And then the interacting, all these things interact with the survival of adults and chicks. So let's have a quick look at the reason cranes look the way they do. They have the long beak for probing, whether it's looking for seeds. The blue cranes obviously have shorter beaks, and they just eat seeds. They have amazing eyesight, obviously, to protect them from predation. They have long necks for walking in water and in grasslands. And long legs for walking water grasslands so that they can see. Obviously, if you have long legs and you need to peck the floor, you're going to need a long neck to be able to do it. So that's important information. The wings are as big as the body needs them to be. Generally, across the globe, they're between 2 and 8 kgs. Different crane species, so the blues and crowners are around 4 to 5 kgs, and of course the wattle crane is the largest African species of crane, so they can be 8 and have weighed a few big boys as well. So most cranes have a red patch, and that's a warning sign to other individuals as to what mood they're in and whether you just walked into their territory. But an interesting fact I always find is that cranes have a loud, shrill voice. Their calls can be heard up to 2 miles away. The secret of their loud call is a long windpipe which is coiled up inside their chest. So I always find that quite an interesting fact that not many people know. So the grey-crowned crane, it's a primitive species of grey-crowned cranes dating back to the fossil records of the Eocene epoch, 56 to 33.9 million years ago, which is hectic. There's at least 11 species of crowned crane that exist in Europe and Northern America. However, because crowned cranes are not very cold hardy, it's believed they died out in these areas as the earth cooled and only survived in warmer Africa. The blue crane. Both the Xhosa and Zulu tribes in Africa revere the blue crane. Zulu royalty were the only tribe members traditionally allowed to wear blue crane feathers, while only Xhosa warriors were permitted to wear blue crane feathers into the battle. You can see that the blue cranes are primarily found in South Africa, making it the national bird. There's very scattered population, small population in Namibia. It's really important that we understand the blue crane in South Africa because we're pretty much holding the global population, and it's indeed facing a number of threats. The wattle crane, of course, critically endangered in South Africa. The last biggest figure was 359 individuals, although that figure, I haven't finished the aerial survey counts, but that figure is looking better this year. And they have 2 flaps, and these flaps hang under the chin and indicate the mood. You can see that there's a central wattle crane population, which is why it's not endangered, but in Ethiopia and in South Africa they are both critically endangered. So very quickly, the blue and the crown crane are summer breeders. Between October to May, they are known to live around 12 years old in the wild and up to 34 years in captivity. They stay with the parents for about 5 months. And the chicks, cranes are mimicry, so they learn by copying the parents, and they tend to breed around 3 to 5 years old. Wattle cranes, on the other hand, are winter breeders, breeding between April and August. They only lay 1 to 2 eggs, only ever rear 1 chick. They stay with their parents for 7 months, and again they learn by mimicry, and then they go off to the floater flock, where they can stay there for long periods. The youngest recorded age of birds is around 2 of wattle cranes breeding, but it's more general to be a little bit older than that. So we can see we either have wetland nesters, such as the nest on the right on a mound, or this is actually a blue crane nest by water. So it does depend on the area, but generally the crown cranes and the wattle cranes are wetland nesters, and the blue cranes are agricultural nesting grassland karoo nesters. Okay, just some amazing photos that our volunteer did, and we can just see why the wetland nesters nest in the wetland, and you can see that the chick, even as early as 3 days old, will have to swim to get to the nest, and that's really showing you why these wetland sites are so important for the protection of chicks and nest survival. Oh, we just seem to skip the slide. So you can see here the chick is very brown, and that is entirely appropriate for hiding away. So in all three species, the chicks, until they can fly, which is around 8 to 12 weeks, maybe a bit earlier for the blue cranes and crown cranes, they have to be the best hiders so that they don't get eaten. And so you can see on this right side of the photo that there is a chick hidden in there. And so understanding these important factors and how the birds use the landscape really helps you to understand why threats are the threats that they have and what we need to do about it. Chicks grow up very quickly, so although they can't fly till around 8 to 12 weeks, they are growing very quickly, approximately an inch a day. So if we consider then the quality of the water in a wetland species, the habitats available for foraging and for nesting, and the areas that the birds need to fly through. So flyways are areas, for example, when they're flying from a wetland area for roosting to their morning foraging. If that crosses power lines, we want to try and identify those aspects of the bird's ecology and biology. And also the quantity of water in drought years, definitely the wetland species suffer a lot more. Changing in the landscape, of the agricultural landscape due to climate change or any other factors alters the survival of both chicks and potentially adults. And so all these aspects are the things that we have to try and monitor, and we work alongside our partners who are the farmers, because cranes, none of the crane species are heavily reliant on nature reserves. There are some nature reserves that hold a number of species, but by and large the populations are kept are found in farming landscapes. And so it's important that we work with our partners who are the farmers and the community owners to help them understand the cranes and how to get alongside to do what they need to do, whilst we're helping them preserve the cranes for the country. So one of the ways we do this is we monitor survival on the nest doing ground surveys, and this was just a recent trip out to ring a crane chick, and this is the Camberg Nature Reserve in Ezenmelek Hazard and Wildlife, and a really enthusiastic bunch of people, great to work with them, and we did manage to catch and ring that chick. And of course, ringing vitally important for long-term data sets to understand the survival. Doing clever statistics, we can look at the colorings and identify survival. And then we do aerial surveys across the Drakensberg region. We've recently done aerial surveys within the Western Cape around the blue cranes. And so this is really important for getting overview of the species, getting maximum numbers, but also it can be helpful in identifying any new and up-and-coming threats that perhaps we haven't heard about, or EIAs that we need to address. And it also brings a great deal of understanding about the movement of the floater flocks when the birds aren't breeding. It's really difficult to follow floater flocks, and so to help us with that, we've been busy tracking wattle cranes, putting trackers on blue cranes, and the idea is to help us understand exactly where the birds go in the landscape that they use and how they use it. And again, this helps us to understand flyaways. This bird that you're just looking at is the wattle crane that was rung 2016, and you can just see where those birds are going. There's some very heavy area uses. So this is really helpful for understanding the non-breeding birds and also the movement of the flocks when they're not breeding. and large, the work that we do has been really had a good impact within the Drakensberg records. We can see steady increases in all 3 species. In 2019, there's 249 for the Warsaw cranes was a bit low just because we had mechanical areas. The flights have to be consecutive days because obviously birds move around quite quickly. But we do see generally, and the figures from this year are the best figures we've seen, but we're just still analysing those. So you can see the blue cranes in the blue, the yellow is the crown cranes, and the red is the wattle cranes. And so we're happy with seeing steady improvement with the work that we're doing alongside farmers, working with partners, and just raising the awareness of the plight of cranes within South Africa. So thanks for joining today. If you want any further communications, please contact us. You can see my email address there. There's a number. Click onto our Facebook page, EWT Facebook page, and come and learn more about us. You know, the ways to help is to always help us identify where the birds are. If you're particularly interested, we're also looking for roost site champions. So as we're identifying roost sites, we want more people to do more work. That's specifically some of the work that I do in the wattle cranes in the Drakensberg. And so we'd really be excited to hear from you. I'd be excited to hear from you if you want to get more involved. And of course, funding is always an issue. So if you want to support us, clock onto our website, and we look forward to being in touch with you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day.
Welcome to Sankoff. I'm David Roberts. I'm the clinical vet here. I've been working in Sankoff for 3 years, and I'd like to just show you around our centre. So Sankoff is a rehabilitation centre for seabirds, and when the birds first arrive, they come to our admissions room, and this is where they go. So this is the centre of the veterinary operations here. When every bird arrives, we bring them in and we'll put them in scale first, get their weight, and then we do a clinical exam and do things like check on how healthy are they. We look at the wings, we do a whole body examination and look for any problems, and then we treat them accordingly. So most of the time they'll probably go into ICU. And we give each bird that arrives a specific number. So these are the numbers of the birds that have arrived this year. For example, we've seen 321 African penguins, and the next one that arrives will be number 322. But as you can see, we see a lot more species. It's not just penguin related here. So after we've admitted them and we've decided how they should be treated, most of the time they do go to the ICU. And so this is one of our ICU rooms. We're going to be quite quiet and have a look. Most of the birds are kept in crates or in little pens as they recover. I'm going to close the door. You can see through there we've got heat lamps. This is the temperature controlled room. We have 2 ICU rooms so that we can keep different birds at different temperatures. A big strong penguin doesn't like to be as warm as a tiny little wattle chick. If we need to do any diagnostics or surgery, we also do it in this area. So you can see through here is our sterile surgical theatre. That's where we do operations, things like broken bones and pinnings, and where we're cutting into healthy tissue. And then we have a prep room as well, where we also do a lot of our wound treatment procedures. So most of the patients that I see, especially the penguins, are wound cases. They've often been bitten by predators, and we'll clean their wounds in this room. And if we are doing more intensive surgery, we'll prepare them in this room and then go on to the next one. We also have an in-house anesthetic system and an X-ray machine. So here's the X-ray room. We have a nice room where we can do the X-rays. We're not going to expose any of the staff or volunteers to X-rays. There's an X-ray machine. This is our anesthetic machine, and we move this around from one room to another where we need it when we need to have birds under anesthetic. And then this is the little office and lab area where we will analyze any of the X-rays and do a lot of blood smears as well. So we're going to go through and have a look at some of the birds outside now. So our second ICU room, which is empty at the moment, birds are outside. These are heat lamps, so we can give individual temperature control to the different birds. And then we can go outside and have a look at pens. We'll start with our aviary, which you can see over there. So this is where a lot of our non-penguin patients recover. After they've been in ICU, after they're getting stronger, they'll go into this aviary and learn to fly and swim enough. So for example, that kelp gull that's just flown off, he's almost ready for release. He just needs to be a little bit stronger and to gain the right body mass before he can go. And now down this side, we've got the area just outside the ICU over here, where some of our ICU patients are recovering. This is the kelp gull that arrived this morning. Oh, this is a kelp gull that's been here for a while. He's got a yellow ring. We've had a few more this morning, but they sit outside in this area to get some fresh air and sunlight. Here's a penguin that had a broken femur, and so you see we've shaved around the top of the leg there. I'm not going to disturb him too much, he doesn't like the camera. We shaved along the top of the leg to pin that femur. We've just taken the pins out yesterday. We'll go and have a look at the pens now. Over here is our water treatment area. We have a lot of swimming pools, and because penguins like to poo in their swimming water, we need very good water treatment so that they've got good quality water. So we're moving into the rehabilitation area now. So this is where our birds will learn to swim, to get properly waterproof, and to get ready to go into the wild. Wave. We've got amazing volunteers here. Don't like the camera. And so here's some of our penguin pens. These are some of the patients, the rehab penguins that are learning to swim. They'll soon be going into the wild. We're just making sure that they're waterproof and that they're the right body weight beforehand. So we've got a small pen at the moment. Most of our rehab patients have been released recently. Outside ICU pen is here. As you can see, there's a lot of cleaning going on. This is special matting, which we use for the penguins to stop them hurting their feet as they rehab. We call it nomad matting. Every day that gets removed and then replaced back into the pen. You can look here. Some of our volunteers just doing some training on penguin handling. It's a difficult skill to learn how to pick up a penguin safely for the penguin and for the handler. And so she's getting supervised by Kyle, who's one of our rehabbers. He does a lot of the training with the volunteers. A few of the ICU birds, these are ones that are strong enough to be outside now. You can see there's one in the background there who has some stitches around his front. They don't need to be indoors in the ICU, but they're outside just recovering until they're finished with all their surgeries. There's another here, number 280. Maybe we can come and have a look. You only have one eye. We're going to do some follow-up procedures to clean up that eye, and eventually we will stitch the skin closed. But luckily penguins can survive very well in the wild and raise chicks and be fat with only one eye, so she will still be released soon. And we've got one other special patient at this point. Don't want to disturb him too much. Here, this is a great white pelican. He's got an injured wing at the moment, and it's not broken, so he's just here for rest and recuperation until that wing gets a little bit stronger. You can see it's not normal at the moment, and then there's his lunch. Great. And you can see some of the little chicks here. These chicks are just learning to swim. You can see the one in the back is pretty fluffy still. This is about the age when they'd normally start swimming in the wild. So they've got a quick swim in the swimming pool, and if they want to get out, then they're gone. Okay, so thanks very much for having a look around Sandcock. I hope you enjoyed it. Please have a look at our booth as well. You can follow our website and find us on Facebook and social media. We'd be glad to answer any of your questions. There should be people online to ask questions for the whole weekend. Thanks. This is just a quick introduction to our home pen. We have several birds that are permanent residents here at Sandcock. Some have been here for years, and they usually can't be released for specific different reasons. Some have injuries, some have been born in captivity and so can't go into the wild. So this is their habitat where they live all the time, and people come and visit Sandcock and have visit them at any point. You can also adopt these penguins, and you get a certificate, and then you can come and look after them, or at least come and see how they're doing every year, adopt them again. So they all have their own little nest boxes. Most of these are African penguins, but we have a few rockhoppers as well. They're the ones with the really nice hairdos. Our home pen also has getting interrupted by penguins. That's a typical penguin bray, why they used to be called jackass penguins. And then our home pen also has a few gulls as well. Oh.
Thank you to the three doctors, Lucy, Lara, and David, for those presentations. We encourage you to go visit the exhibition booths for each of these exceptional organizations to learn more. Up next at this feeder is a feature on the work of our various African birdlife partners. Between our 22 continental partners, there is a huge span of conservation work going on. On feeder 3, we will be having a listen to a presentation on the African Bird Atlas project, perhaps the most important and impactful citizen science project on the continent, while at the main feeder, we have a featured lecture by Duncan Butchert on how to rewild your garden spaces and benefit birds. Do remember to visit our many exhibitors and to peruse our many silent auction items. You're bound to find something that will pique your interest from the over 50 items on offer.